Greetings and salutations, travelers. Welcome back to the Inn of Planar Crossroads. And as always, welcome back to our Around the Hearth discussions. This time, we are discussing low fantasy, high magic, like we told you we would. Before we get into it, let's go ahead and do our announcements as we usually do. I'll start us off so everybody else can think about what they want to say. I'm Adam L. Spain with the Inn of Planar Crossroads. You can support at Patreon, Subscribestar, Locals, or you can do a direct contact to us, and doing so will get you access to our Discord, where we share any kind of PDF content or pictures or things like that we create so that you can use them in your games. And we are trying to get our current milestone at $100 a month of cumulative support from any of those avenues. So once we reach that, we will do our giveaway type of thing. We usually tend to give away a one-shot or something like that. We may do a multi-shot, considering it would be $100 a month through that cumulative support. And as I've alluded to before, if we overshoot it and get enough over the $100 a month, we might have to force ourselves to not just make some dice to give away, but perhaps some metal custom dice to give away. So that's right. I will continue to tease you until we get it. But that is the plan for that. And that is my kind of intro and announcement, because I don't have anything else besides these to announce, which are collaborations. And our current and hopefully forevermore continued collaborator, Dan from Avenue Studios.
Now and always, my friend. Hello, Dan from Avenue Studios. We, of course, live stream Wednesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern. That's our big thing. As of when this comes up, we'll be well into our Knights of New Seattle game in Savage Worlds with the team from AfterQuest, so check us out over there on Wednesdays. Twice a month, the off Wednesdays, we do our themed collaborations with Planar Crossroads. So we take some of the ideas that we talk about here and Around the Hearth and incorporate them into our Forest Forge, where we build a one-shot in Foundry Virtual Tabletop and then play test it at the end of the month. And of course, those who support us through Patreon and Locals get to be involved in that live stream. We have a raffle every month to see who's going to play with us and play test out some of these ideas and see how we can incorporate them into about a 2-hour one-shot. So definitely check us out there. Of course, we have our Open Legend long campaigns going on, and I just got some fresh new Jacob's Labs episodes from all the wonderful people working on that. So I'll be putting those up as well. Check those out. And I'm looking forward to talking about some low fantasy and high magic today.
All right, and going counterclockwise from me, at least the way I'm seeing it and the viewers are seeing it, Josh, what you got?
Josh here from Copper Dragon Games. So glad to be on here with you talking about low fantasy, high magic. Good, cool combination. Over on Copper Dragon Games, we talk about 5e, typically. That's my YouTube channel. Typically, virtual tabletop resources, big, deep dive into lots of the new splintering of 5e resources moving forward, and lots of cool things coming soon. That's all I've got at the moment. There we go.
All right. And then we have Wesley from
DM Tales. You can catch me over at dmtales.com or on my YouTube channel, DM Tales. I think it's DM Tales TTRPG. And I neglected to do this last time. I do have a Patreon. And if you go, I am currently trying to format my one-shots that I've run for Easy D6 that riff off of Hallmark movies that I've entitled Hallmark. And they'll be up for the higher tier of the subscribers. I have 2 of them set in the same town. A third one will be on the way that I'm going to run on May 20th. And if you are interested in that sort of insanity, I'd be more than happy to have you at Patreon and help me keep my site populated with cool things to talk about.
Oh, no, wait a minute. Are we talking about a Hallmark conversion where you would turn them into what they actually are, which is horror movies? Because that would be hilarious.
I haven't gotten to that one yet.
I've
I've done 3. I've done 1 with 5e. I've done 2 with Easy D6 because it's the easiest thing to teach new players, and it's all just riffs off of Hallmark movie riffs. Like those types of tropes come out left and right. The town that only has 50 people, but it has a downtown shopping area that's like the size of New York City. Like that's the type of thing comes out.
Okay. Maybe they live in Wyoming or something.
Normal. So yeah.
You're in good company, my friend.
Well, let's just be fair. We're normal-ish.
Ish.
So,
Nice.
I can't even read that, but that's okay.
all right. And Levi is usually our spotlighter, but
We are full of peeps, so we're okay.
full of peeps, and not the marshmallow kind. Just
So I did just buy some recently.
oh,
Aw.
there you go. Well, you can bite the little things' heads off. And, there you go. Wait, are those enemies in your rubber ducky game? They could be.
No, we
Yes.
haven't been doing anything grid-based for a bit. They could be.
That must happen at
Great.
some point. You'll have to let us know
You
when
get to
you
eat
use
what you
them.
kill.
Eat what you kill. That's right. Eat what you kill when you rubber ducky game.
Put them in boiling cauldrons of hot chocolate. You're all set.
Yes.
That's a really good idea.
Okay, we're getting distracted. So,
For food, I feel like that might be okay.
no, we gotta keep focused. So, you guys, for you viewers, here is what DM Tales YouTube looks like. The backsplash and the logo. So if you want to check that out, the video he has up right now is Arcan Forge. So that's the newest one as of right now. So there you go. All right, let's get to it, gents, because we need to talk about low fantasy, high magic. So do sit down, travelers. Warm yourselves by the fire as you pull up a chair to the hearth and grab your preferred beverage. Join us as we discuss low fantasy, high magic. And diving right in, the one that came up as a really solid example in our pre-chat stuff was Harry Potter. Kind of fits into that. Low fantasy in the Muggle side, a low fantasy Muggle side, and everybody's a human or something like that if they're not a magical creature type of thing. But high magic. So, take it away, boys. You guys had that idea.
As a quick note, another series that has a similar feel with different exacts is Artemis Fowl.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Just thrown out there, one with going a little more into the fantasy race side of things, but I think the important part we're trying to put here is that the world itself is low fantasy in that, like, once you get out of the scope of what the books care about, you get into a lot of a Muggle world where things are just going on day to day. Cars, normal, it's appropriate for that time period. We wouldn't be able to tell the difference until you get into the intrusive magical world that kind of runs under the seams and has control over the Muggle political leaders in some interesting senses. I believe things of the sort also happen Artemis Fowl, though I think their worlds are a little more separated, if I remember correctly. It has been over a decade since I've read Artemis Fowl, so...
There you go.
But the core point here is that even though there is a normal world, when the magic shows up, it shows up. Buildings are burning, large things can explode, mass death, reanimation, time travel of various stripes. Once you break past the fantasy barrier, in a sense, or once the fantasy barrier breaks in on you, the magic that does appear is amazing and terrifying. Is kind of... It's kind of like, if we go back to that quote of sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, if we go like Star Trek visiting cavemen is a potential feeling that is really possible for this clashing between the high magic part of the world and the low fantasy part of the world.
Here's my question. To have a low fantasy, high magic, does the low magic, like for lack of a better term, muggle world, do they need to be mostly unaware of it? Because I would put superheroes in that low fantasy, high magic realm of things, even though people are aware the hero is there. Most people don't have access to it. Or do superheroes belong in their own category and they don't fit there?
So I think that goes, trying not to bridge into our next topic for the next video, but I think that I think it goes back to how rare the magic is. I think if it's high magic setting and the magic is super common and accessible, then if the common populace knows about it and it's common and accessible, it has major implications on society. Like what technology is developed, how we communicate with one another, like everything is changed by the common magic. So I think really you almost go to, if it's super common, then people don't know. If it's rare, as in superheroes, and we're talking more about rare next video, but if it's super rare, then it doesn't have to be necessarily unknown, because the common person doesn't have access, and it's an oddball thing that doesn't necessarily shape society on a baseline level everywhere. It only shapes it in those circumstances where it is interacting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Well, let me throw a little bit of a wrench there.
All right, hit me.
Because there are two anime that actually deal with the superhero idea in different ways, but at low magic, low fantasy, low magic, low fantasy, high magic. And it depends on the scale of the powers. So there's a tier system in One Punch Man, and it would fall under low fantasy, low magic. It's basically, it's just Japan, basically. But there are superheroes, and you have an organization, and the organization is multinational a lot of the times, and we're just using it as a grand idea, as a single conceit for the concept. The only real set of super powerful people are the rare magic ones. They're the big they function as they handle the god level threats, is what they call it. They got their tier system. And so as they do, there are these low level superheroes, I should say, that are sometimes just people that have a little bit of an extra athletic ability, or people with just a little bit of an extra oomph in some area of their life, and they go and they influence the world around them. So that could be a low fantasy, high magic way of dealing with, there's all these different people, or a low magic, low fantasy way of dealing with this superhero idea. You play one of the low level guys. On the flip side of that, because everybody knows about it, on the flip side of that, My Hero Academia, all of the characters in there have huge amount of power. Not everybody has this huge powerful quirk, but the characters do, and they're high magic, and it has influenced the way that the world works. And there's a lot of cooperation between everybody on using their powers to do this thing or that thing, and practically everybody has a quirk. It's rare not to have a quirk. So you could still do low fantasy, because it's happening in real life, in our current level of technology type of thing. So modern setting, but with heroes that are basically common, high magic. They have there's magic everywhere, because their quirks are everywhere. There are literal schools that the best of them go to develop their quirks. Or if you don't have a particularly powerful quirk, you go to a job set that is better suited for that. and it's a high magic setting with low fantasy, and that's a way you can handle that. So
I feel like the scale and how you... Because I think an important part of your point here is that a lot of common people have relatively non-impact... That most people have relatively non-impactful perks. Or, like, lightly impactful. Like, hey, it makes it... Like, I have a slight healing ability, so as a chef, when I burn my hands, like, as opposed to, like, that's just permanent nerve damage, I'm okay in a week. Whereas, I feel like, if not just every player character, but if every character in the world had a similar tier of quirk, it would radically change it farther away from low fantasy.
Because it's everywhere.
Well, and like how powerfully it is everywhere, right? Because like if everyone has the magical ability to shine their shoes, and that's the power everyone has, you're gonna have a world where everyone's shoes are cleaner, and if it's not, it's a fashion statement. But then the rest of the world's normal.
Ish.
Normal-ish.
Normal-ish.
Right, it's like, I know this is a slightly absurd example, but it's like a sense in which magic can be prevalent while still keeping a low fantasy feel, because the magic that is prevalent is the low magic, like tiny magic even, let's say.
Okay.
So I'm thinking I know Levi will like this, clarifying definitions too.
Yeah.
Just to make sure, because I think what we're saying, going with from last time, the definition of low fantasy being something that is relatively recognizable as an Earth, our normal-ish, an Earth-like place. So but now we're doing high magic, so there's lots of, well, I guess this comes back to Josh's question. Accessibility. It would be accessibility to magic. Levi's then putting in this barrier of it needs to be accessibility to, let me rephrase it because I think Josh hit on it, was accessibility to magic that doesn't fundamentally change the path that we have taken with society and technology. Because like Levi's saying, once you're getting it, like if everyone's Wolverine and they can super heal, is medicine not even practiced more? You're getting into like the Shadow of the Conqueror style book of people don't know enough about medicine because there's magic that can heal. So why study medicine when you can just focus on the magic? So would that be, if we're wanting to remain in the low fantasy setting, the accessibility to super powerful magic is the key to keeping it in the low fantasy setting? Or
so define accessibility too, but go ahead.
Well, to go back to what I was saying, so Wesley's original question, I believe, was about whether or not the common populace is aware.
Even aware,
right? And whether like things like comic book style MCU type magic count. Right? And so I was just clarifying and saying, like, well, if it's super commonplace, then it makes sense for them to be aware, right? And if it's rare, then you could really kind of go either way. You could feasibly keep it, but the thing is, if they are aware, then I think you have to, from like a standpoint of keeping verisimilitude in your setting, if there is this super easily accessible magic everywhere and everybody can use it, or everybody at least has some amount of access to it, it's super commonplace, why would we ever invent vacuum cleaners if you have unseen servant that you can say sweep the floors? Right,
or even prestidigitation.
Right, like I think there's whether or not the populace knows about it, whether or not it's a secret thing, I think that really goes into your setting building. of developing your world. Like, how, if they do know, how has that influenced society? Do people use the message spell instead of cell phones, or whatever? Like it, but just I think you have to maintain some form of realism, which is kind of funny because we're talking about high magic, but to maintain some amount of realism, you have to kind of account for how that accessibility affects how we function as a society, or how that Earth-like setting functions as society.
You can use the word grounded instead of real.
Yes. Yeah. And
Well,
I don't know
then-
that I had a real place I was going with that, but I was just.
Well, it's to me, it's really It's just really interesting because superheroes are kind of, for a broad definition of magic, are that, that real high magic concept. And then you have something like Watchmen, where there's literally only one person who has powers, but he has, all of them. And people are aware of it, and it does impact the world, because history's completely changed, but you can still recognize it as 1980s United States, even though there's this stuff going in here. But Dr. Manhattan is definitely a high magic concept, right? He's kind of
AKA
like,
broken.
Yeah, I'm gonna go make life. Okay, that's good. Go ahead, Levi.
Yeah, broken if he were designed to be a main character, as opposed to, he more often feels like a setting aspect.
Yeah, after his creation, he becomes a setting aspect, and not a. He loses his characterhood almost.
Yeah, though too much power too interactively can solve things too easily. That's narratively very boring.
Which is why he got bored.
Yeah. Well, and he's like, I see every reality, so, who cares which exact one I'm walking around in this second?
What's the phrase he says at one point? A live body and a dead body have the same number of atoms. I don't see any difference.
Something along that line.
John. That's nice.
Yeah. So I do think that part of our discussion point of how low fantasy and high magic can meet partially does come up to taste, and where your brain draws the exact lines on fantasy for feel. Because I know that there are some things where, people might want to define My Hero Academia as maybe, mid-fantasy, because it's just so I know that's not, a term in this sense.
It is now.
But it feels like a gray area, and I feel like mid-fantasy is a reasonable way to phrase that it is kind of up to interpretation. Because I'd say that generally, when you're looking around at the world, it does feel relatively low fantasy, but I feel like it is too common to people's experience that, this one, the construction worker's daughter, lifted up that 2-ton pipe by making it weightless for us for a little bit. And that's just part of being in the construction business, is that some people might do that. I feel like it's... I feel like if the power scaling of it were a bit rarer, it would feel more clearly low fantasy. But I feel like it's pretty normal for people to interact with some pretty changing of how the world feels powers.
Interesting.
Well, and there is you can see in some of the better written versions of fiction where they try to deal with that too. They try to deal with this distinction between low fantasy and high magic by saying that this community doesn't necessarily associate with this other community. The wizards and muggles come up again, but if you look too hard at the Harry Potter setting, it doesn't actually logically work. But assuming that you don't look too heavily at it,
but magic.
And you remember that in many ways it is written
for kids.
It's written for kids to grow up with it and to be neat.
So
it was a lot of cool ideas.
Yeah. So, but you can look at that, and there is the possible idea that you can make low fantasy, high magic work with that magic muggle divide if you want to. They could or could not know about it. There may be that if you want to. This whole idea of secrecy is very hard to maintain the larger your population is of magical people. So that would be...
And the higher your magic.
And the higher the magic.
Unless you have a lot of memory wipe magic. Although at that point it gets to kind of like a creepy... Like, yeah, we're a hidden society. We're running you all through puppet strings, but, we're hidden.
Yeah. Well, you can do a lot of things with it. The point I'm trying to get to... Okay, I'm getting lost in my points. So the point I'm trying to get to is that the magical world in Harry Potter, the wizards don't use muggle items. And the muggles don't use wizard items. And it's just like a cultural thing. They just don't mess around with muggle items. There is this cultural divide. And there is a way to handle that to use that if you want to as a mechanism for showing this divide between high magic and low fantasy. As well as mixing in that idea of the next two things we'll talk about, rare and dangerous magic. And those can be useful for preventing a low fantasy, high magic setting from just becoming a high fantasy, high magic setting. Because there's lots of that out there right now. D&D is arguably a high fantasy, high magic setting, or current. D&D from, I guess, 2 on, though there was a lot of, I don't know, I'm not super up on the oldest school stuff, but I
can break it out if I need to.
Yeah,
right there. Right here.
So
I can't point it backwards, but it's there.
I see your fiend folio. You're showing off. Okay.
So that's a way you can do it using a cultural divide. If you're and it depends on how much fantasy you want to mix in, because you can start to lose that low fantasy stuff if you mix in too many new races into your game. That's why it gets a little tricky the further you go into the Harry Potter books to term it as a low fantasy setting, because the concept is that these magical creatures are everywhere, and just, I guess Muggles don't see them, or
no, they wipe people's memories,
right? But you would think that eventually there would just be too many magical things for people to keep having their memory wiped over and over again. So you have a little bit of a trick there. So it's a balance that you can do. I think one of the best ways to handle it is to make magic harder to get, like with the rare magic that we'll talk about, mainly basing it around maybe fetishes or item-based magic or things like that, having to cast through something. In the Harry Potter world, mages don't have to have a wand to use magic, but if they did, that would make it a much more low fantasy but high magic system, because if you need a focus to do the magic, then you start to take away that OP nature of it. You start to make components matter in your games for your mages and so on. So, which is something I like. I'd like that to matter, but that's an idea you can use for that. I think.
Yeah. So I think it seems to me still that it's the to keep it low fantasy is that accessibility barrier. Regardless of whether common people are aware or not, it's how accessible. There's a lot of it out there, but to keep it low fantasy and have tons of magic, there has to be this accessibility block to your everyday person that doesn't take us on a track too far off of what we recognize as normal-ish. I was also thinking about what you guys were talking about. I don't know if you've seen it. It's kind of a cheesy movie, but I like it. Odd Thomas, where he can see dead people and like these like demon-like creatures. I was thinking that's potentially another way to do it where there's a lot of magic, but most people aren't aware because they can't see in that realm. That realm can affect real life, but it doesn't directly affect it. And so there's these few people who can see what's going on. The other idea I thought of was like more of a classic magic where there's some kind of cost of yourself, where there is a lot of magic out there and everybody kind of knows. This could be really well set in a earlier medieval period with witches and stuff, in that, yeah, we know there's magic and you can do some crazy stuff, but you also got to like sell your soul to do it. So
that sounds like a topic for the 4th section.
Dangerous magic.
Do warlocks how they're meant to be played?
Yeah, that's dangerous.
There's actually a cost. So that I think that's probably that thing of where's the accessibility line to this. You can have a lot out there, and then like Josh was saying, the decision of whether the common person is aware or not is going to be more on the feel of your game, how you want to play it. It also goes back to Josh's question of, do you want to play X-Men versus Men in Black? Do you
technically he said X-Files, but we get the idea.
X-Files, X-Men. Sorry,
that is very
I was thinking about.
I keep bringing up superheroes.
X-Men.
It's my fault.
Yes,
I mean,
it's
it's good.
X-Files would work as a low fantasy, high magic version of sci-fi magic, I guess, because they're mutants. But those sound like some awful sci-fantasy. Sounds like some awful magic versions of mutations.
Well, yeah. Like it's comic books.
Go ahead,
they just needed an excuse.
And I like the superhero references, because every time we go anime, I'm just lost.
Fair.
like I have no idea what's going on right now. I am taking your word for it.
The limitation to anime is Star Blazers and Robotech. So I'm like,
oh, you missed
superheroes. I know where I am.
You watch
I watched a little bit of Dragon Ball Z when I was like in 6th grade, and that's as far as it went. I'm lost beyond that.
Fair enough. All right.
We all have our vices.
We're coming pretty close. We're a little over our 30-minute mark, so I guess that means we better get to final thoughts, gents. So we went counterclockwise this time, so I'll start us and then we'll go clockwise from my view. So prepare yourself, Levi.
Yeah.
My final thought is, again, I can bring up the psychic idea. You can incorporate psionics, and that might be a useful way to incorporate psionics in your game when there's maybe no magic in the sense of hocus pocus, but maybe there's psionic type of magic. That could be a useful, that could be a way you could do it while still making it something that is, low fantasy enough to be believable in this fiction that you're making. So that's mine. What you got, Levi?
That if, in this case, if you want to, referencing last time, if you would like to play a system where high magic characters are a relative norm, make sure that if they do anything of that sort in public, it is denoted as magical and strange and what's going on by the people around, to denote, hey, reminder, you have magic. This is a low fantasy setting. You are the strange magical intrusion on their normal everyday life. Be wary of that. Also, don't get burnt like a witch. Just watch out for that one. It's a possibility.
All right.
You're also making me think of X-Men.
Levi got the last comment of the video. He's getting this one too. So
he's 2 for 2.
Don't get burned.
Nice.
That's the comment to leave down below if you made it this far. All right. What you got, Wesley?
So going way back to high school, which is another millennia ago, but I did a research paper on Stephen King novels, and what made him so interesting is a lot of his stories are just fairy tales where the light is just bent, like 2 degrees off of where it should go, and so it goes into this wild place. And so if you're going to do a low fantasy and a high magic, take your normal world and throw this thing in it and just see how the light bends like 2 degrees off of what is normal-ish, and track to where it goes into the uncharted realms, and that's where kind of that cool stuff happens.
All right.
That's cool.
Josh, what you got?
I just keep thinking, I keep thinking how easy it is to mix up the terms low fantasy and low magic, even within the definitions that we established, or high magic, low fantasy, high magic, low fantasy, low magic. In the end, it's a lot of story building and semantics, but if you're having fun at your table and you're throwing challenging things at your players to react to, it's going to be fun. And I don't think you really have to establish which one you're going to go to at the very beginning of a campaign. I think you can start with the idea of normal people, and introduce fantasy elements, and then see how fantastical things go from there. I think that would be an interesting... and if it keeps being fun, you keep adding more crazy, wild stuff to the mix, and just see how far it goes.
That's good. If you end up at high fantasy at the end, that's okay.
Yeah, but baby steps. Baby steps.
Baby steps.
Start low fantasy, low magic. If it's a high level campaign, you're probably gonna end low fantasy, high magic. So there you go. All right, Dan, what you got?
Oh man, I think similar to what I said last time too, in that there's so many options we're talking about here. Because when Levi was doing his last thoughts, I thought of X-Men again. The weird ones standing out, it's the mutants, right? Everybody else is normal, but they do see these things, recognize it. So there's so much play in here, and I think I want to shout out the idea of sci-fi, where you maybe have a primitive culture that we recognize as Earth-like, but there's some kind of advanced culture that's coming in that is seen as magic, and as the characters can unlock that and explore that could be a really cool campaign to play in. That they find out, actually, maybe it's just advanced humans or something. You know, you could go Stargate sort of level with advanced humans, or it's a totally different race. So there's just so many possibilities here. But sticking with that, to make it low fantasy, you need to have that feeling that things are normal-ish, at least at the start. Where you end up at the end, that's the story, that's the fun. And of course, let us know what you've done. What systems you've used, what settings you've used, where you got that balance that we're seeking as we're talking about this, that low fantasy, high magic. I would love to hear what you guys have done.
All right. Means we've come to the end of this discussion. Next time we'll be talking about incorporating rare magic to accomplish these things, specifically using rare magic, I should say, for a low fantasy, low magic, or low fantasy, high magic. But until then, and as always, have a great day, God bless, and enjoy. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
This content was made possible by travelers and viewers like you. Thank you.
All right, let me see.
Beautiful.
Got this one. So, you would be interested, Wesley, because in something that I've been trying to get Dan and Zachariah, and who's over there too, and Jacob, who's over at Avenue Studios, to discuss with me when in person. It is how your faith how your faith has influenced your games, and how your gaming has influenced your faith. You know, a two double discussion. So one time, one the next. But
be interesting.
Yeah.
So
All right.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've got. Now let's switch this one around.